The stars looked different through alien eyes, Captain Zethkar thought as he gazed at the viewing screen of his ship Serenity Dawn. His pale blue skin reflected the soft glow of the control panels around him. The Velthari had been exploring space for 3,000 years, and first contact with new species always filled him with wonder. Today felt special, though. His science officer Kalaneth had detected something unusual in this remote sector. "Captain, we have a new contact approaching," announced Security Chief Threndar from his station. His forearms moved gracefully across the controls. "The vessel appears to be using some form of quantum drive technology I have never seen before." Zethkar nodded and straightened his flowing robes. First contact required careful protocol. The Galactic Council had strict rules about approaching new species. Open a communication channel. Use the standard greeting protocols. On the main screen, a strange ship appeared. It was angular and rough-looking, nothing like the smooth curves of Velthari design. The hull looked like it was made from crude metal plates welded together. Weapons ports dotted its surface in an almost aggressive pattern. Zethkar felt a slight chill. Most civilized species built their ships for beauty and efficiency, not war. The communication channel crackled to life, and a face appeared that made several bridge crew members gasp. The alien had only 2 arms, 2 eyes, and strange hair covering the top of its head. Its skin was a dark tan color, and when it spoke it showed white teeth in what might have been a smile. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Defiant. We're from the planet Earth, and this is our first time meeting other intelligent life. We come in peace." Zethkar felt his heart's race with excitement, a new species making their first journey into space. "Greetings, Commander Morrison. I am Captain Zethkar of the Velthari Exploration Corps. We welcome you to the galactic community. We represent the Galactic Council, a union of peaceful species dedicated to knowledge and cooperation." Jake Morrison smiled wider. "That sounds amazing, Captain. We have so many questions. Our crew includes Chief Engineer Lisa Grant, Weapons Specialist Ryan Brooks, and Medical Officer Amy Turner. We would be honored to learn from you." Before Zethkar could respond, every alarm on his bridge began screaming at once. Kalaneth's normally calm voice cracked with panic. "Captain, massive energy readings detected throughout the system. Something is activating on the dead world in the 3rd orbit. On the screen, the barren planet began to glow with an ominous red light. Ancient structures that had been dormant for millions of years suddenly sparked to life. The planet's surface cracked open like an egg, revealing vast mechanical complexes beneath. "What is that?" Commander Morrison asked, his voice tense. Threndar's 4 hands flew across his console. "Captain, I am detecting massive launch signatures. Thousands of objects are rising from the planet's surface. The first wave of void swarm entities emerged from the planet like angry insects from a disturbed hive. Each one was roughly the size of a fighter craft, but they moved with perfect coordination. Their black hulls seemed to absorb light itself, and energy crackling around their edges suggested they were far from defenseless. "By the ancestors," whispered Kalaneth. The old warnings were true. The void swarm has awakened. Zethkar felt ice in his veins. Every child in the galaxy learned the stories of the void swarm, the ancient mechanical plague that had consumed entire civilizations before mysteriously vanishing. But those were just legends, weren't they? The swarm entities moved faster than any ship he had ever seen. Within minutes, they had spread throughout the system like a dark cloud. The first ones reached an inhabited moon near the system's edge. Zethkar watched in horror as the mechanical creatures swarmed over the surface, consuming everything they touched. Cities, forests, even the atmosphere itself seemed to feed their endless hunger. "Captain Morrison," Zethkar said urgently, "you must flee immediately. Your people cannot understand what we face. The void swarm consumes all matter to fuel their reproduction. They will strip this entire system clean within hours." But instead of turning to run, the human ship moved closer to the Serenity Dawn. Morrison's voice came through the speakers with strange calm. "Captain, your ship looks damaged. Do you need assistance?" "You do not understand," Threndar called out. "We must evacuate now. Our shields are failing, and our weapons cannot harm these creatures." "Lisa, get us between their ship and those things," Morrison said to someone off-screen. "Ryan, charge all weapon systems. Amy, prepare the medical bay for casualties." Zethkar stared in disbelief as the crude human vessel positioned itself as a shield between the Serenity Dawn and the approaching swarm. "Commander, what are you doing? Your ship cannot survive their attack." Maybe not, Morrison replied, but we sure as hell won't leave you to die alone. The first wave of void swarm entities reached them and the human ship opened fire. Instead of the elegant energy beams that civilized species used, the Defiant spat streams of metal projectiles at incredible speeds. The primitive kinetic weapons seemed to actually damage the swarm creatures, causing several to spin out of control. Impossible, breathed Kalaneth. Their weapons are affecting the swarm, but there were too many enemies. The swarm swarmed over the human ship like parasites, their energy fields draining power and eating through the hull. Zethkar expected the humans to retreat or surrender, but they did something that shocked him to his core. Morrison's voice crackled through the static of failing communications. Lisa, prepare for ramming speed. If we're going down, we're taking as many of these things with us as possible. Commander, no, Zethkar shouted. There must be another way. But the human ship was already accelerating directly into the thickest concentration of swarm entities. The impact created a massive explosion that cleared a corridor of space. In that brief window, the Defiance escape pods launched, carrying the human crew toward the Serenity Dawn. Threndar managed to lock onto the pods with the ship's tractor beam, pulling the humans aboard just as more swarm entities closed in. The Serenity Dawn's engines, badly damaged but still functional, carried both crews away from the expanding cloud of mechanical death. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Amy Turner worked alongside Velthari medics to treat the wounded. Her hands moved with practiced skill, and she seemed completely calm despite having just lost her ship and nearly her life. Why did you stay? Zethkar asked Morrison as they watched the void swarm consume another planet on the long-range sensors. Morrison looked at him with those strange, two-eyed features that somehow conveyed deep emotion. Because that's what you do. When someone needs help, you help them, even if it costs you everything. Zethkar realized that perhaps the galaxy had just met something more dangerous than the void swarm. Something that would sacrifice everything for strangers, fight impossible odds without hesitation, and somehow find ways to hurt enemies that energy weapons could not touch. The humans called their world Earth, but Zethkar was beginning to suspect it was something else entirely, a world that forged its children in the fires of constant struggle, creating beings who saw impossible odds as just another challenge to overcome. As the Serenity Dawn limped toward Council space with news of the swarm's return, Zethkar wondered if the galaxy was ready to meet the Deathworlders. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had never seen such chaos. Council Leader Morden stood at the center of the Great Chamber on Haven Prime, his ancient Kreeth features showing the weight of centuries. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the circular hall, their voices creating a symphony of panic and fear. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the same terrifying image over and over, entire star systems going dark as the void swarm consumed everything in its path. Order! We must have order. Morden's voice boomed across the chamber. His translator device struggled to convert his words into the hundreds of languages spoken by the assembled delegates. The situation is worse than our most dire predictions. Admiral Velmore of the Sarkhan Empire rose from his delegation section. His warrior species had conquered dozens of worlds through superior military tactics, and his confidence had never wavered until now. Honored Council Leader, my fleets are already moving to intercept the swarm. We have the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Surely our plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes can stop these ancient machines. A bitter laugh came from the Velthari section, where Captain Zethkar sat with the human survivors. Admiral, with respect, your weapons will only make them stronger. We tried everything. Energy weapons feed them. They absorb our most powerful attacks and use the energy to reproduce faster. Commander Jake Morrison stood up slowly. His strange two-armed form looked alien and primitive among the elegant species around him, but his voice carried a weight that made the chamber fall silent. If I may speak, Council Leader, my name is Jake Morrison and I represent humanity. We just fought these creatures and I think we learned something important. Morden studied the human with ancient eyes. Please, Commander Morrison. Any knowledge could save billions of lives. Morrison looked around the chamber at all the scared faces. The swarm attacked our ship with energy drains and molecular disruptors. Our shields failed within minutes, but when we fired our kinetic weapons, simple metal projectiles launched at high speed, they actually took damage. A ripple of confusion went through the chamber. The elegant Ithquan delegate Zenara spoke up, her voice musical but puzzled. Kinetic weapons? You mean throwing objects? But that technology is tens of thousands of years old. No civilized species uses such primitive methods. Primitive, maybe, said Chief Engineer Lisa Grant, who had been quietly studying a datapad. But they worked. Our railguns punched holes right through their hulls. For about 10 seconds anyway, before they adapted. Admiral Velmore's four eyes narrowed. You suggest we abandon millions of years of military evolution to use Stone Age weapons? This is madness. Dr. Amy Turner stood up beside Morrison. Her medical training had taught her to stay calm in crisis situations, and her voice was steady. Admiral, sometimes the simplest answer is the right answer. These creatures evolved to fight advanced civilizations. They expect energy weapons, shields, and quantum technology. They might not be prepared for something as basic as a chunk of metal moving really fast. The chamber erupted in arguments. Species that had spent millennia perfecting elegant energy-based warfare couldn't accept that their advancement might be their weakness. The proud Zephyrian delegate fluttered his wing membranes in agitation. This is absurd. We cannot ask our people to fight with sticks and stones like savages. Kalaneth, the Velthari science officer, had been quietly analyzing data from their encounter. She stood up with visible excitement. Wait, the human suggestion has merit. I have been studying the swarm's behavior patterns. They adapt to energy frequencies within nanoseconds, but their defensive systems seem designed for a specific type of threat. She activated a holographic display that showed the molecular structure of a swarm entity. Look at their armor plating. It's designed to deflect and absorb energy-based attacks. The quantum field generators that protect them actually become vulnerable when faced with simple kinetic force. Weapons specialist Ryan Brooks nodded grimly. It makes sense from an engineering standpoint. If you're building something to fight the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, you focus on their most advanced weapons. You don't worry about someone throwing rocks at you. The debate continued for hours. Species after species rejected the idea of returning to primitive warfare. The Hegemony Navy commander insisted that their latest photon lances could penetrate any defense. The Crystal Collective believed their harmonic weapons could shatter the swarm's coordination. Everyone had a better solution than listening to the strange aliens from Earth. Then the reports started coming in. Admiral Velmore's first engagement with the Void Swarm was a complete disaster. His mighty fleet of 300 ships met the swarm near the Kepler Nebula. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes. The swarm absorbed every energy blast, every quantum torpedo, every exotic weapon the Sarkhan Empire could deploy. In return, they drained the fleet's power cores and consumed the ships from the inside out. Only 12 vessels escaped to report the defeat. The Crystal Collective's harmonic weapons created beautiful patterns in space, but had no effect on the swarm entities. The Zephyrian gravity bombs actually seemed to help the creatures move faster. Fleet after fleet met the same fate. Advanced weapons that could crack planets apart barely scratched the ancient mechanical plague. Mordun called for another emergency session as refugee ships began flooding into Council space. Entire civilizations were abandoning their homeworlds as the swarm spread like cancer through the galaxy. The Great Chamber was half empty now as many delegates had returned home to organize evacuations. The situation is hopeless, announced the Centauri Prime representative. We must prepare for total evacuation beyond the galactic rim. Perhaps in the void between galaxies we can rebuild. No. Morrison's voice cut through the despair like a blade. That's not an option. Running away just means the swarm gets stronger while we get weaker. Eventually they'll follow us wherever we go. He stood up and faced the remaining delegates. My people have a saying, when you're in a hole, stop digging. You've been trying the same approach for days and it's not working. Maybe it's time to try something different. Lisa Grant activated her datapad and projected human ship designs into the center of the chamber. The assembled aliens stared at the crude angular vessels with obvious distaste. These are our standard military designs. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no quantum anything, just thick armor, nuclear reactors, and lots of ways to throw heavy objects very fast. Nuclear reactors? Gasped the Altarian delegate. But nuclear technology is so dangerous and primitive. Dangerous, yes, Morrison agreed. Primitive, maybe. But it works. And right now, working is all that matters. Dr. Amy Turner had been studying the medical data from swarm encounters. I've been analyzing the few tissue samples we recovered from destroyed swarm entities. Their self-repair systems are incredibly advanced, but they're designed to heal energy damage. Physical trauma seems to overwhelm their healing protocols. You're asking us to become barbarians, said Zanara quietly, to abandon everything that makes us civilized. Morrison looked around the chamber at the frightened faces of beings whose worlds were being consumed while they debated philosophy. Sometimes civilization is a luxury you can't afford. Sometimes survival means getting your hands dirty. The chamber fell silent as the weight of their situation settled in. Outside the windows, refugee ships continued to arrive, carrying the remnants of civilizations that had trusted in their advanced technology to save them. Morden finally spoke, his ancient voice heavy with resignation, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. Commander Morrison, what exactly are you proposing? 3 weeks after the council meeting, the first human fleet arrived at Haven Prime. General Patricia Hayes stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching through the viewport as alien ships fled past them toward the outer rim. Her weathered face showed no emotion, but her crew could feel the tension radiating from their commander. Behind her, Admiral Kevin Thompson coordinated with the scattered remnants of Council forces, trying to establish some kind of defensive line. General, incoming transmission from Earth Command, reported Communications Officer Betty Clark from her station. Put it through, Hayes replied. The hologram of Fleet Admiral Carl Stone appeared, his image flickering due to the massive distance between Earth and Council space. Patricia, what's the situation out there? Stone asked without preamble. Bad and getting worse, sir, Hayes replied honestly. The swarm has consumed 47 star systems in the last week. Council forces are in full retreat. Most species are evacuating to the outer rim, but some are talking about fleeing the galaxy entirely. Stone nodded grimly. What about their military capabilities? Admiral Thompson turned from his console. Sir, we've analyzed their combat footage. Their weapons are incredibly sophisticated, but they all use energy-based technology. Plasma beams, quantum disruptors, harmonic resonators. Beautiful weapons, but completely useless against the swarm. And our weapons? Stone asked. Crude, primitive, and apparently exactly what we need, Hayes said with a thin smile. Commander Morrison was right. The swarm doesn't know how to handle kinetic weapons and chemical explosives. The transmission crackled as another wave of refugees passed by, their ship's engines interfering with communications. When it cleared, Stone was speaking to someone off-screen. He turned back to the camera. Patricia, Earth has voted. Full military mobilization. Every ship we can spare is being loaded with our oldest, most primitive weapons and sent your way. Understood, sir. What about the volunteers? Stone's expression grew somber. Over 2 million applications in the first day. We're having to turn people away. Apparently the idea of saving the galaxy has captured the public imagination. After the transmission ended, Hayes walked to the observation deck where Lieutenant Commander Steve Davis was briefing a group of alien military observers. The assembled beings looked uncomfortable as Davis explained human combat tactics using a crude holographic projector. The key to human warfare is what we call overwhelming firepower, Davis said, his casual tone contrasting sharply with the horrified expressions of his audience. While your people prefer precision and elegance, we prefer to solve problems by throwing as much destructive force at them as possible. Cultural analyst Zanara of the Ithquan raised one of her delicate appendages. But surely there must be some consideration for minimizing collateral damage and preserving enemy assets for study. Davis laughed, a sound that made several aliens flinch. Ma'am, when something is trying to eat your entire civilization, collateral damage becomes a luxury you can't afford. Our philosophy is simple. If it's hostile, we kill it with the biggest explosion we can manage. He activated a series of weapon demonstrations that made the alien observers step backward in shock. Kinetic penetrators moving at significant fractions of light speed, nuclear warheads designed to crack asteroids, chemical explosives that could level city blocks. Each weapon was more primitive and devastating than the last. Fleet Commander Zorthan of the Hegemony Navy spoke up, his voice tight with disgust. These weapons are barbaric. They show no finesse, no consideration for the art of warfare. Art? Davis looked genuinely puzzled. Commander, war is an art, it's problem-solving. The problem is that something wants to kill you. The solution is to kill it first, as efficiently as possible. General Hayes joined the briefing as Davis was explaining human ship-to-ship combat tactics. The aliens watched in growing horror as he described ramming attacks, suicide runs, and the use of damaged vessels as improvised weapons. "You must understand," said the elegant Velthari observer Kalaneth. "Civilized species have moved beyond such brutal methods. We wage war with precision, minimizing casualties and destruction." Hayes fixed her with a steady stare. "And how's that working out for you against the swarm?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The alien observers had no answer because the truth was obvious to everyone. Their civilized methods had failed completely. Entire fleets had been consumed without inflicting significant damage on the enemy. Captain Helen Rodriguez entered the briefing room, still wearing her flight suit from a reconnaissance mission. Her squadron had just returned from observing the swarm's advance, and the news wasn't good. "General, the swarm has reached the Centauri cluster. They're consuming 3 planets simultaneously. Any sign of Council resistance?" Hayes asked. Rodriguez shook her head. "The Centauri defense fleet tried to make a stand. Lasted about 20 minutes before the swarm drained their power cores and started eating their ships from the inside out. Classic energy weapon failure." One of the alien observers, a crystalline being from the Harmony Collective, chimed sadly. "Perhaps we should accept that our time is over. The swarm represents a superior form of evolution. Resistance may be futile." "Like hell it is," snapped Sergeant Tony Clark, who had been quietly cleaning his kinetic rifle in the corner. "Superior evolution, my ass. They're just machines that haven't met the right kind of opposition yet." He held up his weapon, a simple device that fired metal slugs using chemical propellants. To the aliens, it looked like a museum piece. "This rifle is over 500 years old in basic design. No computers, no energy fields, no quantum anything. Just metal chemistry and physics, and it'll put holes in things that your fancy plasma cannons can't scratch." Dr. Amy Turner arrived with a data pad full of analysis from the latest swarm encounters. "I've been studying the medical reports from survivors. The swarm entities show consistent vulnerabilities to kinetic trauma and chemical damage. Their self-repair systems can handle energy-based injuries within seconds, but physical damage takes significantly longer to heal." Admiral Thompson looked up from his strategic displays. "The first Earth reinforcements just jumped into the system. 200 ships all equipped with kinetic weapons and chemical explosives. They're requesting permission to engage the swarm advanced scouts near the Vega system." Hayes nodded. "Permission granted. Let's show these machines what Deathworld warfare looks like." The alien observers watched through the fleet's long-range sensors as human ships closed with a small swarm formation. Instead of maintaining safe distances like civilized fleets, the humans charged straight into close combat range. Their weapons were crude streams of metal projectiles and primitive explosive devices, but they worked. Swarm entities that had shrugged off plasma beams and quantum torpedoes suddenly found themselves with gaping holes in their hulls. Their adaptive defenses, designed to counter energy attacks, couldn't cope with simple kinetic penetration. For the first time since the crisis began, swarm entities were being destroyed faster than they could adapt. "Impossible," whispered Zenera. "How can such primitive weapons be more effective than our most advanced technology?" Steve Davis smiled grimly as he watched the battle unfold. "Because sometimes the best way to kill a computer is with a hammer." The human victory at Vega was small but significant. For the first time, the galaxy had hope that the Void Swarm could be stopped. But everyone knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when the swarm's main forces arrived, and the primitives from Earth would have to prove that Deathworld savagery could triumph over ancient mechanical perfection. The tide of war began to turn 3 months after humanity entered the conflict. Colonel Danny Mitchell crouched behind a pile of rubble that had once been a beautiful Altarian crystal spire. His combat armor was scratched and dented from weeks of fighting on the swarm-controlled world of New Athens. Around him, his Marines prepared for another assault using weapons that would have made their alien allies sick with disgust. "Martinez, how many grenades do you have left?" Mitchell asked through his helmet radio. Corporal Sofia Martinez checked her belt pouches. 12 frags, 6 incendiaries, and 4 of those new chemical bursters that Turner designed. "Good. Jackson, what's the status on that flamethrower?" Private Joe Jackson hefted the heavy weapon that sprayed burning chemicals at short range. "Full tank, sir. Ready to barbecue some robots." The plan was simple and brutal in the way that human military operations tended to be. While alien forces had tried to retake New Athens using elegant orbital bombardments and precise energy strikes, The humans were going in on foot with fire and explosives. The Void Swarm entities had adapted to energy weapons, but they still struggled against primitive chemical and kinetic attacks. Mitchell activated his tactical display and studied the swarm processing center they needed to destroy. The mechanical creatures had built a massive complex where they broke down captured matter into raw materials for reproduction. Destroying it would slow their advance significantly. "Remember, people," Mitchell said to his squad, "these things learn fast. They've already started adapting to our kinetic weapons, so we need to hit them with everything we've got before they figure out how to counter chemical explosives." The assault began at dawn. Human Marines charged across open ground while alien observers watched in horror from orbital platforms. Where civilized species would have used cover and careful tactics, the humans ran straight at their enemies while screaming battle cries and firing weapons that had been obsolete for thousands of years. Sergeant Lucy Adams led the first wave, her squad carrying simple metal blades alongside their explosive charges. When her rifle ran empty, she drew a knife and began stabbing mechanical entities that their energy weapons couldn't even scratch. The swarm creatures, designed to absorb and redirect energy attacks, had no programming for dealing with sharpened metal driven by muscle power. Back in orbit, Dr. Amy Turner monitored the battle from her mobile laboratory aboard the medical ship Mercy. She had been working around the clock to understand the swarm's weaknesses and develop new weapons to exploit them. Her latest discovery would have shocked the galaxy's scientific community if they hadn't been too busy fleeing for their lives. "Admiral Thompson," Turner called through the comm system, "I'm reading massive confusion in the swarm's coordination signals. The entities on the surface are trying to adapt to kinetic and chemical weapons, but their base programming doesn't have protocols for such primitive attacks." Thompson nodded as he watched the tactical displays. "How long do we have before they figure it out?" "Unknown, sir, but I'm detecting something interesting. The swarm seems to have been designed by a species so advanced that they never considered someone might attack them with fire and sharp sticks." The ground battle raged for 6 hours. Human soldiers used tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. When their ammunition ran low, they used bayonets. When their bayonets broke, they used rocks. When Corporal Martinez's flamethrower was damaged by swarm energy weapons, she rigged it to explode and used it as an improvised bomb. The most shocking moment came when Private Jackson found himself surrounded by swarm entities that had finally adapted to resist his chemical weapons. Instead of retreating, he activated every explosive device he carried and charged straight into their midst. The resulting explosion cleared a path for his squad while alien observers watched in stunned silence. General Hayes received the reports from New Athens while coordinating the larger war effort from her command ship. The humans had lost 30% of their ground forces, but they had destroyed the processing center and dealt the swarm its first major defeat. More importantly, they had proven that the ancient machines could be beaten. Captain Lisa Grant, now in command of her own ship after Morrison's heroic sacrifice, was working with alien engineers to retrofit their vessels with human weapons. The process was difficult because most alien ships were built around energy-based systems that the humans couldn't use. "The problem," Grant explained to Fleet Commander Zorthan, "is that your ships are too sophisticated. All these quantum field generators and harmonic stabilizers just give the swarm more energy to feed on." Zorthan watched with obvious distaste as human technicians welded crude kinetic weapons onto the hull of his flagship. "This is barbaric. These weapons will ruin the ship's elegant design." "Maybe," Grant agreed, "but they'll also keep your crew alive. Sometimes ugly and functional beats pretty and dead." The cultural shock went both directions. Human soldiers found themselves working alongside alien warriors who had been trained in completely different traditions. Sergeant Tony Clark spent weeks teaching Sarkon troopers how to fight with primitive weapons after their energy rifles proved useless. "The key is aggression," Clark explained to a group of four-armed aliens who had never fought without energy shields. "Your people are used to fighting at a distance with precise weapons. Against the swarm, you need to get close and hit them with everything you've got." The Sarkon warriors struggled with the concept. Their military traditions emphasized honor, precision, and minimizing casualties. Human warfare seemed chaotic and wasteful to them, but when the next swarm attack came, the aliens who had learned human tactics survived while those who stuck to traditional methods were consumed. Dr. Turner made her most Important discovery while studying swarm entities, captured during the New Athens assault. She found evidence that the machines had been created by an ancient civilization called the Architects, who had been so technologically advanced that they had never encountered kinetic weapons. The Architects built the swarm to fight enemies who used energy-based technology, Turner explained to a joint command meeting. They programmed in countermeasures for plasma weapons, quantum disruptors, and exotic matter manipulation. But they never considered that someone might throw rocks at their creations. Admiral Thompson leaned forward in his chair. What does this mean for our strategy? It means we're fighting an enemy that's simultaneously more advanced and more primitive than us, Turner replied. They can adapt to our most sophisticated weapons in seconds, but a simple chemical bomb confuses their programming for hours. The war was far from over, but humanity had given the galaxy something it had lost: hope. Across Council space, alien species began manufacturing primitive weapons based on human designs. Factories that had produced elegant energy weapons retooled to make simple kinetic projectiles. Scientists who had spent their careers perfecting quantum technology found themselves mixing chemical explosives. The transformation was painful for species that prized sophistication and elegance, but survival mattered more than pride, and the humans had shown them that sometimes the most primitive solution was the most effective one. As Colonel Mitchell's Marines prepared for their next assault, this time joined by alien soldiers carrying human weapons, the galaxy began to understand what made Earth's children so dangerous. They came from a world where survival meant constant adaptation, where elegance was a luxury and effectiveness was everything. The Void Swarm had awakened expecting to face the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Instead, they found themselves fighting Deathworlders who had never forgotten how to be savage. The final battle for the galaxy began when long-range scouts discovered the Void Swarm's central processing network. The massive construct was built around a dying star, feeding on its energy to power the endless reproduction of swarm entities. Admiral Kevin Thompson stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display show the largest military operation in galactic history taking shape. Status report. Thompson called out to his bridge crew. Communications officer Betty Clark looked up from her console. Sir, we have confirmation from all task forces. 2,000 human ships, 800 alien vessels retrofitted with kinetic weapons, and 300 support craft. The largest combined fleet ever assembled. Thompson nodded and opened a channel to General Patricia Hayes, who was coordinating the ground assault from her dropship. Patricia, are your Marines ready for this? Hayes's voice crackled through the speakers. As ready as anyone can be for storming a planet-sized machine that's been eating stars for breakfast. Sergeant Lucy Adams has her demolition teams prepared, and Colonel Mitchell's assault groups are loaded with every primitive weapon we could fit in their transports. The swarm construct was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was roughly the size of a small planet, its surface covered with mechanical spires and processing centers that glowed with stolen stellar energy. Millions of swarm entities swarmed around it like angry insects protecting their hive. Captain Lisa Grant commanded one of the human task forces, her ship loaded with nuclear warheads and kinetic penetrators. Around her, alien vessels that had once been works of art now bristled with crude human weapons. The transformation still shocked her, seeing elegant Velthari ships covered in missile pods and railgun turrets. All ships, this is Admiral Thompson, came the voice over the fleet communications. Remember, we only get one shot at this. The swarm has been studying our tactics for months. They've started adapting to kinetic weapons, so we need to hit them with everything at once before they can adjust. Fleet Commander Zorthon of the Hegemony Navy had spent the last 3 months learning to fight like a human. His once pristine flagship now looked like a flying weapons platform, covered in armor plating and bristling with primitive projectile weapons. The transformation had been painful for a species that valued elegance above all else, but survival mattered more than aesthetics. Human vessels, Zorthon said over the tactical channel. My ships are ready to follow your lead. We have learned much from your people about the art of savage warfare. The first phase of the attack began with a massive kinetic bombardment. Thousands of ships launched metal projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, turning space around the construct into a storm of hypervelocity debris. The swarm entities tried to intercept the incoming projectiles, but there were simply too many targets moving too fast. Dr. Amy Turner monitored the assault from her medical command ship, watching as her sensors detected massive explosions across the construct's surface. "Admiral, the kinetic bombardment is working better than expected." The construct's defenses were designed for energy weapons. They're struggling to cope with simple mass impacts. But the swarm was learning fast. Within minutes of the first bombardment, new defensive structures began emerging from the construct's surface. Energy fields designed to slow or deflect kinetic projectiles. Adaptive armor that could absorb impact energy. The ancient machines were doing what they did best, adapting to counter their enemies' tactics. "Time for Phase 2, Thompson announced. "All assault transports, begin your runs." General Hayes felt the familiar weight of gravity as her dropship accelerated toward the construct's surface. Around her, Marines checked their weapons one final time. These weren't the sophisticated soldiers that alien species fielded. They were rough, scarred fighters carrying weapons that belonged in a museum. "Listen up, people," Hayes called out to her troops. "Intelligence says the construct's core is buried about 5 miles down. We need to fight our way through automated defenses and swarm entities to plant enough explosives to crack this thing open." Sergeant Lucy Adams hefted her backpack full of chemical explosives. "General, what if the swarm adapts to our demolition charges like they did to our rifles?" "Then we improvise," Hayes replied grimly. "That's what humans do best." The dropships hit the construct's surface like meteors, their armored hulls designed to survive impacts that would destroy more sophisticated craft. Marines poured out of the smoking wreckage, immediately engaging swarm entities that rose from the mechanical landscape to meet them. The fighting was brutal and primitive. When energy weapons failed and kinetic rounds ran low, humans fought with knives, clubs, and bare hands. Corporal Sophia Martinez used her empty rifle as a club when ammunition ran out. Private Joe Jackson improvised explosive devices from damaged equipment and personal supplies. Above the surface, the space battle raged with unprecedented savagery. Captain Grant's task force had closed to point-blank range with the swarm defenses, trading shots at distances that made shields and evasion impossible. It was the kind of slugging match that human naval doctrine had been built around, but it horrified the alien observers. "This is madness," gasped cultural analyst Zenara from her observation ship. "They're destroying their own vessels to get close enough to use their weapons." Admiral Thompson's flagship was taking massive damage, its hull cracked and atmosphere venting from dozens of breaches. But the ship's nuclear arsenal was still functional, and that was all that mattered. "All remaining ships prepare for final assault. We're going in." Deep inside the construct, Colonel Danny Mitchell's assault team had fought their way to the central processing core. The chamber was vast, filled with mechanical systems that processed stellar matter into raw materials for swarm reproduction. It was the heart of the ancient plague, and destroying it would cripple the entire network. "Charges set," reported Sergeant Adams, her uniform torn and bloody from hours of fighting. "Timer set for 5 minutes. All teams, this is Mitchell. Core charges are active. Everyone out now." But as the human forces began their retreat, the construct's defenses activated one final countermeasure. Blast doors sealed throughout the structure, trapping most of the assault teams inside. There wasn't enough time to break through and escape. Mitchell looked around at his trapped soldiers and made the decision that would echo through galactic history. "All teams hold position. We stay with the charges, sir." Adams looked confused. "The blast doors will contain the explosion if we're not here to keep the charges in the right place. Someone needs to make sure this thing dies." Thompson watched from orbit as the construct's surface erupted in a chain reaction of explosions that turned the massive structure into expanding debris. The stellar fires that had powered it for millennia were finally free, creating a new star that would shine across the galaxy. The Void Swarm, suddenly cut off from their central coordination, began to falter and shut down throughout galactic space. After months of terror, the ancient plague was finally dead. 6 months later, Council Leader Morden stood before the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds in the rebuilt council chambers. At the center of the hall, Admiral Thompson and the surviving human commanders waited to receive formal recognition for their service. "Today," Morden announced, "we established the Galactic Defense Initiative under human leadership. We have learned that sometimes the most advanced solution requires the most primitive thinking." Captain Lisa Grant, now promoted to Admiral, looked out at the assembled aliens who had learned to fight like Deathworlders. "The galaxy is safe, but we can't forget what we've learned. Progress isn't always about moving forward. Sometimes it's about remembering where we came from." In the end, the aliens could only stand in shock as they realized that the savage humans who had saved them represented not the galaxy's past, but its future. The Deathworlders had taught them that survival mattered more than sophistication, and that sometimes the best way to face the future was to embrace the primitive strength of the past.